tangata he Māori reo he Māori ora he Māori ora
In this episode of Oro Rua, Horomona connects with researcher, composer, academic and mātanga reo, Dr. Ahukaramū Charles Royal. No Ngāti Whanaunga, no Ngāti Raukawa te hau ki te tonga, no Ngāti Tamaterā, no Ngā Puhi hoki. Ahukaramū explores his involvement in te pūoro as a classically trained musician with a passion for the indigenous musical practices of the Māori, including te reo, mōteatea, haka and tākaro, and how this passion has led to a deep love for the whare tapere and all of its fascinating complexity. No reira e te iwi, whakarongo mai.
Nau mai kia hau manu e.
Tēnā tātou katoa e te whānau o te motu. Tēnei au, Horomona horo e mihi atu ana kia tātou i te rangi nei. Kia ora whānau, once again in this Oro Rua podcast series, we go around the motu having a kōrero with people involved in the beautiful world of taonga pūoro. And today is another special day. I am joined here by a beautiful practitioner, a wonderful kete mātauranga, and just an awesome brother from another mother in terms of kaupapa Māori, wānanga Māori, and the revitalisation of our mātauranga. And so, tuatahi e hoa, tēnei te mihi nui ki a koe, tēnei te mihi aroha atu ki a koe, ko koe tēnā, kua pātata mai nei, kua uru mai nei, ki roto i tēnei kaupapa o Oro Rua, no te whānau o haumanu, tēnei mātou e mihi kauatu ana ki a koe, e te uri o haumanu, nō reira, tuatahira e te tuakana, tuatahira whakamārama atu ki te whānau, ko waira no hea rā koe.
Kia ora, tēnā koe Horomona, tēnā koutou katoa, koutou e whakaroko mai nā, i o koutou ka anga, i o koutou wāhi mahi, kia hau e kōrero atu nei, kia māua ko Horomona, e mihi atu ana, tōku ingoa ko te Ahukaramū, no hauraki a hau, kōku iwi ko Ngāti Whanaunga, ko Ngāti Tamaterā, no Ngāti Raukawa hoki i tau ki te toka, no Ngā Puhi hoki a hau. Hoi no tōku ka ngāke, kei aua, kei whakatiwai, and kei konei hoki Māui tēnei wā.
Tēnā koe hoa. We are now in series 2 of Oro Rua podcasts for our haumanu whānau. And in this journey, we've spoken to a number of practitioners, a number of artists in and around the journey of taonga pūoro. And so one of my first questions to you, Ehua, is how were you introduced to this amazing world of taonga pūoro?
Yeah. So I think the first thing to make clear from the outset is that I'm not actually a taonga pūoro practitioner myself. But I've hung around with a lot of good mates who are, such as yourself, Oro. I'm a musician first and foremost, and went to music school, and there's things to say, lots of things to say about that. But after leaving music school, I really wanted to plunge myself into music of Aotearoa, and I was also very interested to learn te reo Māori and my own whakapapa and things like that. So I really plunged myself into all of that, and went off, as I describe it to myself, I went off in search of a music indigenous to Aotearoa. And the music that I first found, and I found was the reo itself, was te reo Māori, and learning mōteatea and kōrero and things like that. And so I really got stuck into all of that, learning waiata, mōtawhito and karakia and all of that kind of stuff, and loved it. And that is the music, the indigenous music I found in Aotearoa. And then along the way, because I was a musician, of course I was involved in a lot of Māori musicians, I played in Aotearoa, the band, a bit way back in the day, for example. And I played in another band called Taubira, which was a band in Ngāti Raukawa. And then played on a lot of other mates' projects, different, Tony Huata and different people. I played in different things. It didn't take too long before I met Hirini Melbourne. And Hirini and I were on the original Puatatangi committee in the early 1990s, where we were all developing plans around Māori music generally. And of course, Hirini and Richard were, really in flow then with developing the modern taonga pūoro practice that we know now. And so that's where I met Hirini, was in the early 1990s, and that was my introduction to taonga pūoro. And we ran a hui in 1994 at Te Whanaunga, which was really kind of the formal starting point, you might say, for me into the world of taonga pūoro. Although I'd kind of done a few things before that. We had that hui in 1994 in Otaki, and that was where Te Kui Te Whare was launched. And Richard was there, and Hirini was there, and other wonderful people. Rangiria Headley was there, Moana Maniapoto was there, Bernard Makawari was there, Ray Mercer was there, Brian Flintoff was there, Richard, of course, was there, and so on. And so that was my first kind of formal, you might say. And then as a part of Puatatangi, we did a couple of performances with Hirini of presenting the work of Puatatangi with Hirini playing in various things. I remember we did something in the Wellington Art Gallery in 1993 or something. Remember we all went to Gisborne one year as Puatatangi. Hirini was there. We went to see Ahukaramū Genesis playing in the Gisborne Town Hall, and so it was at the early 1990s when my introduction to the world of taonga pūoro.
As Haumanu has been going through its stages of evolution, being mentored and being inspired by the likes of Hirini Melbourne and Richard Nuns, Te Rangiria Headley, those names you mentioned. As a musician, and as you were going through those journeys, you were saying earlier that it was through your love for te reo Māori and ngā mōteatea that sort of led you into this pathway that you are on as a musician, as a practitioner, as an artist. I remember at a number of wānanga that we would have with Papa Hirini and Papa Richard in Rotorua. And, one of the things mentioned was during the revitalisation, one of the things that really assisted in the melody lines, the rhythmic patterns, was actually through the listening and the delving into the realm of ngā mōteatea and its connection to taonga pūoro. As practitioners today, one of the foundational uses of playing taonga pūoro was actually accompanying the mōteatea. And it was through the likes of one of your the kuia from Ngāti Raukawa, Pairoa Winera, and through those particular early archival snippets that came through. And so as a practitioner in the mōteatea field, what would you call the relationship between the singing of the mōteatea and what you've heard so far in regards to the playing of taonga pūoro, an accompaniment, or the playing of taonga pūoro with ngā mōteatea or as the ngā mōteatea?
Yeah. Well, my first response would be to say kia kotahi te reo, meaning that there was no real differentiation between them.
Kia ora.
Meaning, and what I mean by that is, I'd set off on this journey to kind of, find a music indigenous to Aotearoa. What would be a mātauranga Māori approach to music making? What do we regard music itself to be? And the place I got to was this idea of reo not being language, but being voice. And that reo is to do with the reo of the natural world, with the voices of the natural world. And so, and I first kind of cottoned onto this when one of our aunties in Ngāti Raukawa described the Poia Te Taku Poi Pātere, and said that you when you sing Pātere, you are to be like the sound of rapids in a river, and the way the pebbles move across and bump into each other in the rapids. That is what the Pātere sound is. And then later, my uncle Māori Marsden from up north used the expression ki te ngeri te hau, if the wind is boisterous and so on. And then that gave me a clue. Well, when you do a ngeri, which is a kind of chanted composition, you're supposed to be like a boisterous wind. And after a while, I came to see that this was the entire model that our people had, that when it came to performing, when it came to playing our instruments, they're to bring the voices of the natural world to life. And the point that really got me on this thing was, finally, my uncle Māori's explanation of the examination, the final examination of the tohunga, of the student in the whare wānanga, that they had to go out into the natural world, and they are to, if they're dedicated to tāne, for example, they were sent out into the forests and there to meditate, whakatiki, and to undertake nohopuku, was meditation. And the whole idea is that they're not to return to the whare wānanga until a truly original idea or thought has come into their minds. And if it had, they could then return and say, and present the case, you might say, to their teachers that I have had an original idea. And the question of the examining priest to the student is, pehe nei te kōrero a te wairua tāne ki a koe. That's exactly the sentence that Uncle Māori used. Pehe nei te kōrero a te wairua a tāne ki a koe. Meaning, what did the spirit of tāne tell you or say to you? But what I think the quality is what I say, is not just the thought that tāne is given to you, but what is the voice, the kōrero that has been given to you from the tree. The tree has spoken into you and given you voice, and you articulate yourself. So this is I think this is deep indigeneity. This is deep mana whenua, deep tangata whenuatanga, the degree to which the natural world speaks into our consciousness and into our creativity, and we allow it to do so, And I think that's fundamentally what underpins mōteatea. That's what underpins, or particularly the performance of mōteatea, particularly the way we stand to be like the trees and, or be like the birds and to perform and so on. So I think ultimately mōteatea and taonga pūoro all come from that one idea, that one realm of the deep identification and connection with the natural world.
Yeah, well, because you see that a lot with this whole reinvigoration recently in Aotearoa in and around the kaupapa of rongoa, and a lot of people using, once again, the use of taonga pūoro in different rongoa practices or healing practices. I remember when I started learning from Papa Hirini and Papa Richard, and we'd go to different wānanga, there were times where, some of the words like ori ori ngāo and ori ori, ore ore, and a number of different types of words that would be used just to get people to sit down, to close their eyes and just listen. Listen to te reo whakatangitangi o te pūoro, whether it was the kōwauau, the pūtorino, whichever instrument a person held, or swung or beat, and it took people back into that state of, as you said, the nohopuku, and reflected on the breath of the person. And I do remember hearing the likes of those kaumātua from back in the days, like Papa Hiko Hohepa of Te Arawa, where in a lot of the old pātere or waiata mōteatea that they would sing, you would never hear silence between a verse or any line of kupu. The person, there would be somebody within the tira that would start the next line before the end of the last kupu is said. And so from the start to the end of that particular waiata, there was never a break unless it was specifically within the meaning of the story of that patere
Yes,
or mōteatea. And so it gave the importance of the breath and the importance of that, as you said, in the mōteatea, in the oriori, in that. And so, ngā mihi nui mō tērā. You have a lot of people today that are, finding a new love for taonga pūoro.
Yeah.
And the new love that a lot of people are finding today with taonga pūoro has come from the practice of many. And one of those practices that have really inspired a generation is the use of taonga pūoro in, I suppose, what you would say, another type of whare. And I know that type of whare is something that you've held close to your heart, and that type of whare that you've worked for many, many years in the passions of what you do as a practitioner, as an artist, or as a tangata, and the use of taonga pūoro within the revitalizations of te whare tapere.
Yes.
And so, homai he paku kōrero. It'd be great to hear what inspired you to rekindle the kupu or the use and the mahi of te whare tāpere, which taonga pūoro has played a beautiful part in terms of the use of taonga pūoro in the noa state. Not so much in the tapu state as it's known for, but also in that performance state alongside karetao, alongside kai kanikani, alongside story time.
Yeah. So my discovery and journey into the whare tapere comes directly out of the same journey I was referring to earlier. And that is, I did a master's study in 1991 on mōteatea of Ngāti Raukawa, Ngāti Toa. And when I finished that, I was very much focused on the history and literature of mōteatea, but not anything at all really to do with performance and composition. Why did our people compose things? And when the time came to perform, how did our people perform? What were the circumstances? What were the practices and the methods that our people used to perform? And it was while going off in search of that quest, find answers to that question, that I discovered this thing called the whare tapere, which I didn't know at all prior to that time. I discovered it in the writings of Elston Best, but I also discovered it in things like the manuscripts written by Martin Te Whiwhi for Ngāti Toa in 1852, where he talks about the story of Tinido and Kai, which is the founding pūrākau of the whare tapere. And so when I discovered this thing called the whare tapere, and we had such a thing historically in our culture, it was so exciting for me. I just think, oh man, this is it, because it brought together my twin passions of creativity, of artistic composition and creating things, together with I was very conscientized into tino rangatiratanga, and I wanted to make a contribution to tino rangatiratanga. So with the whare tapere, it brought these two things together and so I've been on that journey for a long, long time about how to be an artist and a thinker and a researcher at the same time in the context of contributing to tino rangatiratanga going forward. So that was a very exciting discovery, and I've been on that journey now for I don't know how long, but a long time.
And well, when you took that leap of faith and recreated from your rangahau, from the knowledge pathways that took you into that space for te whare tapere, and I know myself included and other taonga pūoro practitioners you brought on board to be involved in the whare tapere and to bring a lot of those different aspects of te whare tapere from the taonga pūoro, the performance, from the performance through to the traditional Māori games and the traditional Māori games right through to the aspects of, the kākara, the sense and the storytelling. And one of the interwoven things with all of those practices was story and song.
Yes.
And I notice, like in the books of Elsden Best, and when you do look back into a lot of the early writings, anything to do with, I suppose taonga pūoro being a musical instrument in one of its uses, and of course the traditional Māori games that either had a little lullaby attached to it, a waiata aringa attached to it, or some type of waiata or performance base. And so the whare tapere seemed to be the perfect space to rekindle those flames. And through the years that you started the whare tapere through to today, how has the journey?
Yeah, it's a very interesting journey. I have to say, when I first got interested in whare tapere was as a composer, and I went off to look for material to help my compositions. But the further and further I got on, and the more I saw I needed to do a lot of research to really understand where our people had been with it, it became a research project. And so the first times that I was putting together whare tapere, I was very dominated by a research view of whare tapere, not so much a composition view. We composed things, we certainly did. We composed lots of things. I composed some things and things like that. But I was very much at that time of the view that because there were taonga pūoro and the whare tapere of old, we must have taonga pūoro now. Because we had karetao and the whare tapere of old, we must have karetao now, this kind of thing. But after a while, I came to see what's actually most important is the kaupapa, kia kawe tātou te rehia. And it is possible to select taonga pūoro, program taonga pūoro, or program karetao, or program haka, or program kōrero, but not achieve rehia, right? Because we're on a different we're on a kaupapa of inclusion of these things, not actually thinking about whether people really are having an experience of rehia and what is rehia anyway, So after those first experiments with whare tapere, you were heavily involved in too, of course, and in that early 2010s to 2014, 15, I'd spent a period of time just reflecting upon all of that. And now, having returned now, which I'm really pleased that we're back on board now, we're on going again, I'm really returned with much greater commitment to the kaupapa of kia kawe tātou te rehia, and thinking about ensuring that people truly have an experience of rehia when they come to the whare tapere. We want to inspire people, we want to uplift people, we want to teach them things about what's important and give them an experience of rehia. So that's one of the really significant changes in my thinking over the last few years, yeah.
And I know as a musician for I'll say many moons now.
Yes, and suns.
And you involve yourself both in that traditional aspect through the mōteatea, through to your love of contemporary music as well, from whether it's playing a Fender guitar or playing a Steiner piano. You've played with a number of taonga pūoro practitioners. As you said earlier, from playing in the early days with Papahereni. Yeah. And now the likes of those like Papahereni and Richard and Te Rangiria and co, are no longer with us. What they left is this new generation of taonga pūoro practitioners and storytellers and musicians and artists that are continuing their interpretation of the love and the passion to make sure taonga pūoro in this ever-evolving world that we're in doesn't mimiti haere again, or doesn't get lost in the cacophony of sound of music today. Tell us how has as a composer of music, as as an artist or a musician, what are some of the aspects that you look for in collaborating with a taonga pūoro practitioner or collaborating and creating music with an artist that's a taonga pūoro player?
So, my personal approach to art making, so I have these two careers. I'm a researcher on one hand, and of mātauranga Māori, and on the other hand, an artist of some kind. And more and more, I'm really committed to art, which is really about getting to the truth of our experiences and who we really are as a people, and what's really going on in the world, and what's in it, and using art to talk about that, to unravel it, to interrogate maybe, to unfold, to explore, and so on. So telling stories, I find, is really, really important. Interestingly, I do that in my research career as well. So they do both in that. So when I'm looking for collaborations with taonga pūoro players, it doesn't mean they have to be like that, but it's good to know that from each other that we know where we're each at, and that kind of thing. I think that's one thing. Secondly, there is a thing called I don't know, there's probably a better word, but the musical sense. When I play with musicians who I regard as true musicians, there's just something about them that there's a sense, kind of like a sixth sense inside them, that they make great choices when it comes to, a musical melody or something, or inflection, or the choice of instrument, or the mood to go for, or something like that. And over the years, I've been really fortunate to play with some really great New Zealand musicians in different places, and they've always got that. They've always got some kind of sense about them, about making great choices. Particularly really good, great taonga pūoro players, of course, are terrific improvisers and have got wonderful intuition to intuit at that moment that's what's required here versus that's over there and so on. And I don't quite know, put my finger on it, but I do know when I'm in the presence of real musicians versus musicians who will go through the motions and, who can play guitar or can play the piano and things like that. But it seemed to me that there's something about there's a musical sense of some kind, and I love it when I'm with musos such as yourself, and I can just intuit, I can feel it. There's a thing bubbling away there that's exploring and coming up with and saying, no, I'm going to use this instrument at this point, this way, and it's a great choice. It's,
And so one of the wonderful things, and I know the likes of Papa Hirene and Papa Richard and them are looking down, and I think they have could hold a sense of pride in terms of, taonga pūoro is in a lot of spaces now, and people are using taonga pūoro in so many different areas, in education, in health, in science, in so many different areas that, the stories of taonga pūoro would be revered, being the foundation of that particular, I suppose, movement. Such as the story that you talked about earlier of Tiniro and Kai, because for me as a practitioner, that was one of the, I think about the third story that I'd heard in terms of when I fell in love with taonga pūoro. The first real story I heard was the typical, because when I was starting to get heavily involved in taonga pūoro I was living in Te Arawa, in Roto Rua, and so of course I heard the story of Hinemoa and Tutanekai,
yes.
And then of course you always, I loved reading those Guinness Book of Records books back in the day, and the longest name in the world always comes up, and it's that tau mata whakatangihanga ko wauwau o tamatea turipu kakapike mau ngā horonuku pōkai whenua ki tana tahu.
Yes.
And so that was the second, and I'd heard of Tiniro and Kai, but not the depth of the power that taonga pūoro played in it. You know, and so were there many other stories in your pathway of ngā mōteatea, of te whare tapere, of other stories that you would hear for those up-and-coming emerging artists that are listening? Was there a way that you found those stories, or are there some words you can share that could lead them into finding stories of taonga pūoro hidden within the breadth of pūrākau that we have in te ao Māori?
Yes, I am absolutely convinced there is a lot more out there to be discovered amongst our iwi hapu whānau communities. I feel like I've only just skimmed across the top and uncovered the more well-known stories of Tinirau and Kai. Right here in Hauraki, we've got the story of our kuia ko Te Kaureremo from Whakatiwai, right where we are right now. She was an exponent of the whare tapere, and there's a description of her performance in the whare tapere, creating these illusions with her hands. Stories like that. There's Tū Whare Toa Nene Motu, his third wife on the Motu River. She's an exponent of the whare tapere. More well-known ones are things like Pungan Puhi Huia in Auckland. It's controversial because it's not clear who actually composed that story and whether John White, the ethnologist, composed that story. Quite apart from the question marks about who composed it, it nonetheless contains some really fascinating detail about the whare tapere and about taonga pūoro performance and so on. I went off in search of stories that assisted the whare tapere. But of course, there's lots of usages of taonga pūoro outside the whare tapere. You know, there's the amazing pahu that's at the base of the flagpole in the Tūrongo Garden at Ngā Rua here, at Tūranga Waiwai. That's an enormous pahu that used to be on the Hakarimata Ranges. And that was brought down, I don't know, 1920s or something like that. But it was a massive, huge stone pahu. It used to be on the Hakarimata Ranges and was brought down, and it sits at the base of the flagpole where they do the Paumāori Karakia in the garden in front of Tūrongo at Tūrongo Waiwai. There's things like that, you know, all the way around the place. And I think, you know, if you're from Ngaitahu, for example, or if you're from Ngāti Porou, or if you're from Taranaki, I think just going into your own iwi kōrero, you will undoubtedly discover things. I mean, one thing I didn't realise, for example, we have a kuia Ngāti Raukawa in the south whose name is Te Tau o Pūtehue. That's her name, Te Tau o Pūtehue. And I said, oh, that's got to be something to do with the music of Hine Pūtehue, you know. Lots and lots of things. It's a matter of, you know, just being on the journey to explore and find out. Because we're in Hauraki, you know, we've got a people right in Hauraki at Te Aroha, they're called Ngāti Tumutumu. You know, and you think, now, goodness me, that's got to be something to do with, because we know tumutumu is not just the stone, but it's the actual act of beating and marking time, you know. So there's a lot more. There's some standard ones out there, the love stories, Hine Motu Tāne Kai. There's lots of those kinds of stories where taonga pūoro features, certainly Pūtorino and Kōwauau and stuff like that. We have a story here, right, Marutuahu played Kōwauau here. Bits and pieces of things like that. So, yeah, there's a lot more to discover. Yeah.
One of the beautiful things is, in Series 1, I had an interview with Ahukaramū Charles.
Yeah.
You know, and he's one of our beautiful exponents of ngā tākaro, alongside Haku Brown and their whānau that have been really rediscovering and reinvigorating our tamariki and kura up and down the motu, all around the ao, with the specific games that our tupuna had, from the whai through to the most well-known, I suppose, in terms of big games is like kiorahi and hakariki, poitoa, mūtorere, heitama tūtama, hipi toitoi. And inside those particular games was the power of song, the power of waiata. And is that sort of one of the areas where I suppose could be one way for this next generation coming through with the taonga pūoro? I know Hine Werangi Kohu always says, hey, taonga pūoro isn't just the kōwauau and the pūtorino and the pūtātara. Your reo is a pūoro as well, to reinvigorate, because when you see a lot of the old writings, there seems to be a song with everything. And have you noticed that in your journey so far?
Yeah, definitely. So a couple of things about tākaro. The first thing about tākaro is that one of the reasons why it features so prominently in whare tapere is that tākaro is a real quick way to get to rehia. If the kaupapa is kia kaua tātou te rehia, let us be taken by rehia. If that's the kaupapa, one of the marvellous things with tākaro is it breaks the ice quickly amongst people, and boom, you're into that rehia feel straight away. That's why I always love starting our whare tapere days with tākaro. And those who don't want to be part of tākaro, of course, sit in the whare manaki and just tell each other tales about all sorts of things and shenanigans and all those kind of thing, gossip or whatever. So that's the first thing. Secondly, there are many tākaro which have waiata associated with them. Certainly many of the whai, the string games, spinning tops, the tā pōtaka, things like flying kites. Te whakahoro taratahi is the expression for that. So there are lots of waiata associated with various tākaro. And then on top of that, there are, I think, some tākaro implements that are actually taonga pūoro, and vice versa. I'm just trying to think of some. You might know some for yourself, but like we have a kōrero here about tā pōtaka was a very, in Ngāti Whanaunga here, we had a kāinga here called Tūwhituroa, and they had a tā pōtaka, they had a pōtaka there that was said to be very, very big, and it really was very loud. It created sound as well as spinning, and people could hear it right down the coast. That was said to be, you could hear it from afar, that they spun it so powerfully and it was designed in such a way that you could hear it from a long, long way away. So I think there are some tākaro implements which are equally taonga pūoro. Yeah.
And what would you say to a lot of our up-and-coming practitioners that have found, whether it is through playing games, I know a lot of people have found a love for taonga pūoro through music, in the musical sense, but more and more we're discovering that there are a lot more people coming through and getting into taonga pūoro and learning about taonga pūoro through the things like the whare tapere, rongoa, the healing methodologies, using taonga pūoro, using their own tinana as taonga pūoro. What would your words of, I suppose, encouragement be for those that are trying to find where they fit? Because some, they may not be players, but they could be storytellers, or they could be involved in so many other ways. What would your words of encouragement be to them?
Well, first and foremost, like any artistic journey, if you're regarding yourself in that way, the artistic journey is very much about getting progressively deeper and deeper and deeper into oneself, and to understand, at depth what moves you and what's significant to you, and where does your nature take you, where is your natural talents and inclinations and things like that, and you get to progressively deeper understanding of the truth of oneself, and the truth of one's people as well as you go along. So and that can take so many different forms. It can, sure, it might directly take you to be a practitioner of taonga pūoro, but it might also take you, as you suggest, in the direction of being a storyteller who collaborates with taonga pūoro players, which is what I do generally, or composing music and then collaborating with taonga pūoro musicians, or a healer, for example, and collaborates with taonga pūoro musicians. And just on that theme, it's just reminded me of, we tend to think about hauora, we're so dominated by Western thinking, it's just... I'm talking about myself as much as anybody else. We're so dominated. So when we think about health and hauora, we're still thinking about patients on a table and doing something, right? But I just reminded of our good friend Aroha Yates Smith, who to me really brought home to me that wonderful and beautiful theme called the healing of the land, and where taonga pūoro is the use of taonga pūoro and the healing of particular parts of the land, which actually is the healing of the self, you know. And I remember she came out to Waimango to our papakainga, and one of the very first things she did was a great big karanga to the whenua, and feeling, you know, very honoured by that, of course, of having aroha there and doing that. But as our hui unfolded, coming to learn, see more of her thoughts about this, that the land needs to be healed, but the healing of the land is actually our healing, you know, and the use of taonga pūoro in that, and I think, crikey, I was just about to swear then, Horomona. Crikey dick, that's a beautiful theme, a very profound theme, you know, very profound, very, very profound. Yeah. And I love that, and I love that. It really completely turns ourselves on our head, and thinking of, when we think about, you know, healing and stuff like that, there's a person unwell, and then someone comes along and heals them, you know. Whereas this thing is actually about healing the land, which turns out to be our own healing. So it's a beautiful thing.
When Haumanu Collective was put together, I suppose in an official way, only a couple of years ago, you were a part of that journey, and what eventually happened is when we kick-started off these new opportunities for taonga pūoro players up and down the motu, we came up with a fusion of a whakatauki, and it goes ko te piko o te māhuri, kuia te tipu o te rākau.
Yes.
He rito tangata, he Māori oro, he Māori reo, he Māori ora. And through that particular whakatauki, we bring in a lot of our aspects of our foundations through to our kaitiakitanga and things like that. And was there through your journey of te reo Māori and ngā mōteatea and your journey with whare tapere, were there any, or would you have a whakatauki or he momo kinga in regard to taonga pūoro?
I once wrote a waiata about, actually for that 1994 hui.
Oh, okay.
Which was commemorating the arrival of taonga pūoro Ngāti Raukawa that had, long, our kuia Pairo Winero, he was Pairo Tātana was her name. And she was, she was still playing taonga pūoro in the late 1970s. I think she died in the early 1980s, something like that. But anyway, many years later, when taonga pūoro finally arrived back in Ngāti Raukawa, I felt moved to compose a waiata about the arrival of taonga pūoro upon Raukawa Marae. And it goes, te kaumārua rangi ngā marama o mei, ko tahi mano iwara iwi te kaumā whātetau, i taimai ngā taonga pūoro ki rungo Raukawa mōtai tangatarau e. Ngā pōtiki toa rakaba mao māne whiu ngā rai, māne whiu ngā reo ki ngā rai o te motu. Te tau o hine pū te hue, te kai o tūmata kōkiri. Te wawaritanga o pūrere hua whakaorake ko te tau o ngā tūpuna whakaorake ko ngā reo o te ao. Pūoru whakairo. Pūoro nuku, pūoro rangi, pūoro tangaroa. Iahu mai rā koe i he i te kukunutanga i ngā pōrā o te orokohanga. And it continues, and I can't quite remember the rest of it, but it's all about the voices coming alive again. Yeah, coming alive again. Whakaorake ko ngā reo o te ao.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Ngā mihi nui e hoa. I just love those kupu. Pūoro nuku, pūoro rangi, pūoro tangaroa. Yeah, rawe. And are there any he kupu tāhau kia waiho ake kia rātau e whakarongo ana kia tāo e kōrero ana. Is there any closing words that you'd like to share to those whānau that are listening? We've gone through a number of different kete mātauranga from the journey of mōteatea, the whare tapere, both traditional and contemporary forms of music, working alongside taonga pūoro and the stories encapsulated within taonga pūoro.
Yes.
Are there any kupu whakamutunga, any closing words that you may have to all of those whānau that are listening?
Well, just simply words of encouragement, really. We've been given this tremendous gift from Hidini, who got the ball rolling, on the modern day. I mean, we all regard him as the godfather of, the modern day taonga pūoro. And he is. He truly is. He's and it's a wonderful gift he's left to us. And we've all benefited from his passion. And then, of course, Richard and many others who been part of the whole journey for the revival of taonga pūoro, and this is a kind of tremendous gift that those people have given to us, and I think it's really incumbent upon us to make sure we do not allow this gift to disappear again, and that we fulfill and strive very hard to meet their expectations and their dreams for it. So I think we've got to honour the gift that was been given to us. The second thing is have the same level of courage and commitment that Hidini had, and even better him in the sense that he had the courage and the vision and the commitment and drive to bring them into reality again, to revive them again. The next step I see is to take that same energy and lift it up again by now searching for ways by which taonga pūoro becomes even more powerful in our communities, in our experiences, in our grappling with life today. That it's not that we need to move beyond the situation of saying taonga pūoro helps healing to really showing how taonga pūoro helps healing. So I feel that just as Hidini made that threshold crossed that threshold from not having taonga pūoro to now coming into the world again, we similarly need to cross the next threshold, which is about maturing the tradition, expanding it, growing it, providing more colours within it, building new instruments, growing the next generation of exponent performers and improvisers and so on. I'm saying things, of course, Horomona, you're well aware of. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. But we should match Hidini's courage and his vision with our own and take what he's given us and grow it even more.
Anō reire hua, tēnei te mihi nui, tēnei te mihi rangatira tū kia koe. Kua roa nei au e hihi ana te kōrero tahi kia koe I runga I Oro Rua. Anō reira, no te pito o te whānau o haumanu ara ko tō whānau tērā. Tēnei te mihi nui kia koe mō tō wā I wainganui a tātou I roto I te kaupapa nei o Oro Rua. So awesome to have you here in the Oro Rua podcast, bro, and to share your words of wisdom, your experiences, and your knowledge. And so, in that sense, whānau, ngā mihi nui kia koutou e whakarongo mai ana kia Oro Rua, tēnei māua ko taku tuakana nei, te Ahukaramū Royal e mihi kau atu ana kia koutou katoa. E Charles Mauri ora, tātou katoa, tihei, Oro Rua, kia koutou katoa.
Kia ora tātou.
Ko te piko te mahuri, ko ia te tipu a te rākaui. Heri tā tangata